back to the show. I'm Phil Vischer. We're here on the podcast. I am here with Sky Jitani.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Sky. And we have a guest.
Neil Carter.
I was going to say your name at some point.
I was helping you out just in case.
Maybe I didn't want them to know yet.
Okay.
Maybe it was supposed to be a surprise.
Did I steal your thunder?
Isn't there a Nell Carter? Isn't that African American actress?
The actress
From
Give me a break.
Okay, no relation?
I've never gotten that before ever in my life.
No,
Yeah, no, we're not
No.
related. I know. I get that a lot though.
really?
You might need to scoot up a little bit to the mic.
Okay.
Just so
Yeah,
you know.
okay, think radio.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
is like radio,
All
not
right.
like
Except-
TV.
Gotcha.
This is not TV. Disregard the cameras.
Okay.
Theme song time.
All right.
Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And we got video. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here. We'll talk to Sky, but no Christian too, because she's not here. But we've got Neil Carter here for you. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right
You should have done it as
Here.
a French P, because Christian's in France.
Why? Oh, Christians in France. I forgot. Oh, that would have been good. We're back from being interrupted by the FedEx man, which also, that happens on high-class productions.
Right.
Too.
Taco.
Oh, you forgot about Taco the Bell? Like the Colbert Report, every now and then they have to cut because the FedEx man has to deliver something. Okay, we're here with Neil Carter. Neil Carter's our guest. He's a friend of mine. We met like a year ago.
Something like
or
that.
So
Maybe a little bit more ago.
Online when I was when I reviewed the Peter Boghossian book.
A manual for making atheists? Is that what
A
it's called?
manual for creating.
atheists.
Atheists aren't made. They're created.
Oh, wow, nice.
But
He
not
did-
by an intelligent designer.
He did not choose that title, by the way. So that was
your
one of
authors
those,
never
that was
do.
one of those publishers things, and actually
Really?
it probably miscommunicated the point of the book.
Probably.
They just
but
want a
it's
title
gotta
that's
be catchy.
provocative.
Oh, yeah, he told me
It was
what his
clickbait.
title was.
Right, exactly.
Clickbait.
I'm facing that right now, actually, with a
The whole world
publishing
is
issue.
clickbait.
Good luck with that.
Neil Carter is a high school geometry teacher, a father of 5. 5?
Yes.
That's a lot.
It's a long
Geometry? You
story.
get to specialize just in geometry?
It's a big enough school.
Oh, wow.
Almost like a quiverful. And a writer for Pathos.com. He lives in Jackson, Mississippi. Now that's south.
That is in the South.
Yeah.
It is
Okay,
the
just
South.
checking. He mostly writes about living as a skeptic and former evangelical in the heart of the Bible Belt. He's the director of group development for recovering from religion. That's a thing.
It's a thing.
It's a.
It's a thing people do.
I know it's a thing people do, but it's an organization.
That's something
with
people
that
do
name.
who are still religious.
Exactly.
Do you go ahead?
I'm
Sorry.
not done.
I just want to jump right in.
He's got more. He's a charter member of the Mississippi Humanist Association. Have you found a second member yet?
yeah, there's plenty.
Okay, in Mississippi?
Yeah, believe it or not.
Okay, and he's the state representative for both the Secular Coalition of America and for the Openly Secular Campaign.
Do you think at some point all these organizations need to kind of,
Get together?
is there too,
Make some macro organization?
need some critical mass?
Right. Well,
Just like the Christian world.
it's kind of like
where we
denominations.
don't have too much fragmentation.
yeah,
No,
try to
no.
put the Baptists and the Presbyterians and the Methodists all together into one group and see how that
Yeah,
works.
We can't even get the Southern Methodists and the Northern Methodists
Exactly.
back together.
Where are you from originally?
Jackson.
Really? 'Cause you don't sound that southern.
It depends on who I'm talking to.
I see.
I don't mean
You're
to.
a shapeshifter.
It just does that by accident.
Okay, so tell us your story. You grew up, I assume grew up in church because it was Jackson, Mississippi.
Right.
What kind of church tradition?
Southern Baptist.
Okay.
My background was Southern Baptist.
As we see.
My pastor was Frank Pollard, who was pretty well known at the time. He was on the Baptist Radio Hour for a number of years, and it's a good church, and it still is. My family's still very connected to it. It's a large church. It's about $10 million budget, that kind of size, like 5 stories. So it's a mega church, and that was my world. And I was in that world probably until my mid-20s, and then the next 10 years were in the house church world, which is how I knew Frank.
What made that?
My study of the New Testament. I became enamored with the idea of primitive Christianity and the idea that if we're, as a good Baptist, I was wanting to try to duplicate the New Testament experience as much as possible.
Right.
And in my personal...
Acts 29.
Yeah, my study led me to looking for a more, decentralized, open meeting-based kind of participatory type church experience. And so that led me to the house church
So
world.
10 years. In
10
that.
years.
Like, before we get further into the story, overall, was that a positive
Yes.
move away from mega church to house church? Or
Yeah, I loved it.
Okay.
It fit me very well. I was never fit very well for traditional church ministry. And I went to seminary and I did the Bible degree thing, but I just didn't want a traditional pastorate. So I was always drawn towards more of what I saw as a Pauline method of, you have a job, and then your ministry is something you do when you're off of your job.
Did you try making tents?
Well, I didn't actually,
Literally?
because I'm not that good at making tents. I can't even camp out very well.
Me neither. It's okay.
But I did teach school, so that was a choice to intentionally make a job, a profession that was not, my ministry would not be dependent upon that.
That's a growing movement, too. There's a lot of momentum.
Intentional
Right.
bivocational ministry, right?
And you led the house church? You
I was
started
an elder in the church. It was a larger movement that I was becoming a part of that was based in Atlanta and eventually moved to Jacksonville. The movement itself kind of had its center move, but Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, okay.
It was a small but international network of house churches.
Okay.
And
So it was a big bunch of international house of church?
it was churches that met in homes, but on purpose, not as a temporary thing.
This
where they get a building.
This wasn't Church Multiplication Associates, was it?
No, it wasn't associated with them. Okay. But it's all a part of a larger house church movement that probably started in the 90s or so.
Okay.
And that was
this the 90s? Are we talking?
Well, I moved in 2000.
2000. Okay.
So I wanted to as early as 95, but I had to wait until my wife was convinced to move. So then we eventually did it and did that for about 10 years. And it was a good experience, and it fit me really well. And before long, I was taking leadership positions. I was writing a book. I was going and helping plant churches and other places, and got to travel around with that some and do some, ministerial type things. But then I quit.
And then you had a Damascus Road experience.
In the reverse.
And it was Richard Dawkins who appeared to you.
Right.
Said, "Neil, why are you persecuting me?"
Yeah.
No, you said in a couple of interviews I noticed that you always had an inner skeptic.
And I didn't really identify with many of the people who wrote about atheism because they came from a background so different from mine.
Right.
Their background was really they had never been inside the faith that I grew up in, so they didn't know how to relate to it. And that's always been a disconnect for me.
So the popular narrative is that when somebody is grown up and completely enculturated into evangelicalism, or whatever you want to call it, the popular narrative is, well, people give that up or they walk away from it and they may declare themselves an atheist, not for any kind of theological or intellectual reasons, but because they've just had horrible experiences.
Right. That is the standard narrative.
That's the standard narrative.
And it's wrong.
And that's what I want to get to, is your narrative.
Why is it standard?
Well, it's the assumed narrative.
It has to have happened at least once, right?
It's standard because it fits what people's preconceived notions are of what should be the reasons why. Well, I mean, if you believe that your faith is entirely rational, then you would believe that if somebody leaves it, it can't be for rational reasons.
Irrational.
It must be for irrational reasons. It must be for personal reasons.
Okay.
And I didn't have a bad experience. I have bumped into people who have. But even the people who have had bad experiences, when we talk through why they left, the bad experiences just sort of opened up questions for them, and then the questions themselves led them to leave. But in people's experience like mine, I didn't have a bad experience. I had a good experience. I just thought my way out of it, decided I didn't believe it anymore.
How long did that take?
A long time. It was a good 4 or 5 years of processing, but I think there came a point where I just decided I was in my mid-30s and I had to start thinking more deliberately through the things I was always questioning, and then it happened kind of quickly, probably a year or two. I would call that quickly, because there wasn't anybody to talk to about it. I didn't really have anybody I could connect with, and so it was something I kind of had to go through by myself. I tried to talk with some friends, but it was a very emotional topic for them.
Bump into Penn and Teller on a regular basis.
But so you didn't find? Was there anybody in your house church community that you could be honest with about? Hey, I got serious questions here.
Yes,
about
there were. We were kind of on the cutting edge of a lot of things because it's pretty radical to be in a house church. I mean, especially if you grew up in my world.
So I think what we're going to take away from this is the house church is really creating atheists.
Yeah,
right.
That's a manual for creating
There you go.
atheists.
Right, become a house church.
Form a house church.
Well, and some would say that the progressive Christian movement is a gateway drug to atheism
So
as
the
well.
answer
That's
is everyone
probably
just has to stay in big Southern Baptist.
If you could
megachurches.
just stay evangelical,
if we
then
stay fundamentalist,
Yeah.
even better.
Right.
Stay fundamentalist.
Actually, fundamentalist is one of the worst things to do, because what happens is most of the people who end up jumping all the way from one end of the spectrum to the other came from fundamentalism.
I've noticed that.
I don't know if you,
I've noticed the
Pendulum swings,
angriest atheists
Are the ones who grew up
often
fundamentalist.
have,
You're right.
Fundamentalist church camps in their backgrounds.
Right. I can't identify with that, because growing up Southern Baptist in an urban sort of setting, if there is such a thing in Mississippi, I did not grow up fundamentalist, and we would have distanced ourselves from that.
Okay.
Although I would contend that fundamentalists and evangelicals believe the same things. They just express them differently. It's a stylistic
That
difference.
would be an interesting conversation.
Well, there's some truth to that.
I mean, can you name something that fundamentalists believe that evangelicals don't believe?
Well, you go back to the 50s with Graham and the whole emergence of the neo-evangelical movement, and a lot of it was the false choice they saw as you either believe the Bible or you adapt to cultural engagement. And Graham and others came along and said, no, you can believe the Bible
do both.
and engage culture, and that's
Right.
what became
That's a
evangelicalism.
difference of expression, not of
Right.
belief.
It's a philosophy of cultural engagement
yeah,
and
I
ministry.
think more and more
rather than separatism.
You might see it in how to define inerrancy. In forms of inspiration.
Do evangelicals believe differently about inspiration than
A lot
fundamentalists?
do,
Yes.
actually. It's changed.
Yeah,
I guess it depends on who you
whether,
ask.
whether
Yeah.
it's word for word inspiration or because the evangelicals I hang with believe there are mistakes in the Bible. Most fundamentalists do not.
Right. Most evangelicals I know would get real uncomfortable around that discussion.
The word Nebuchadnezzar is misspelled in Jeremiah and spelled correctly in Daniel. If you go back
That's
to
a
the
pretty
Hebrew.
minor point.
Well,
but
those are the
part
kinds
of the
of
problem
differences.
is, if you go back 100 years, there was a whole large group of Christians who would joyfully identify as fundamentalists.
Mm-hmm.
Very few today would say, yes, I'm a fundamentalist, but they've adapted the title of evangelical,
Mm-hmm.
so now it's gotten very muddled. What is evangelical? What is fundamentalist? And they all kind of become interchangeable.
Right.
Right. Well, and evangelicals come to mean now what fundamentalists do.
Exactly. Right. And that's why so many.
And you would find,
don't
I
wanna-
think in most fundamentalist circles, you'll find a much higher rate of young earth creationism than you will in evangelical
Okay.
circles.
That's
or if you
I'll grant that.
talk to Justin Brierly again. and
Justin Brierly,
Right.
would he consider himself evangelical?
I think he would, but evangelicalism in England is very different than in the
Yeah,
U.S.
and there fundamentalism in England.
It does exist. It's just very small.
They're like,
Well, bring up the subject of evolution per se, or common ancestry, and then the difference between evangelicals and fundamentalism isn't so big.
Billy Graham believes in evolution, and he would consider himself not a fundamentalist, but an evangelical.
Really?
Yeah, he has no problem with
John
evolution.
Walton's been on this program a
Well,
lot.
I saw that, by the way.
Yeah, John Walton's been on the show. I mean, Wheaton College believes in evolution, and it's the center of evangelicalism. So there,
Okay.
you go in the front of the science
but
building, and there's a mastodon that
to
says
Neil's
it
point,
lived
though,
20,000 years ago.
I think you do need to differentiate at times between academic evangelicalism, anti-rights, and John Walton's all that, and popular
Yes. Well,
evangelicalism,
and that's
which I think you're probably absolutely correct.
This is kind of the conversation that I've had with Peter Boghossian over how the word faith is defined on the street level versus
Right.
what
Sure.
it really means.
the problem is there's a massive gap between really informed evangelical thinkers and the mass populist evangelicalism that's out
people
there.
in the pew.
The people in the
the
pew.
people
There you
in the
go.
pew. Okay,
and that's
so-
true on multiple, including political issues, on and on and on.
So your inner skeptic said, "I can't do it no more." Is your inner skeptic Irish or Scottish?
It
I'm
should
really
be.
hoping.
It should be.
I can't take it no more.
Captain.
I can't. Oh, he said that.
Yeah, something
over
like that.
a decade.
Mine probably has more of a southern accent to it, but okay.
Depends on who you're talking to.
My byline on the
It varies.
website is skepticism with a bit of a drawl.
Oh,
Just a bit of one.
I can't take. But I can't. You can't
Just-
do
just-
the drawl.
It sounds
and then be a skeptic.
inherently
It's-
unintelligent. I know.
Well,
I
it's,
agree.
it's like it just doesn't. Okay, yeah, we get in trouble fairly often for perceived slights of the South.
Well, and it's okay when Christian's here because she's from the
Yeah,
South.
she's
and she
from
can defend
Mississippi.
him, but
Is she really?
Yeah.
We're from in Mississippi.
Laurel,
I know where that is.
Laurel, Mississippi.
There's a,
She's
there's,
talked
a,
about it like every other podcast.
Yeah,
there's a big golf tournament there every year, Labor Day. Yeah.
yeah. Her father was Reagan's Undersecretary of Agriculture,
Something like that.
Okay.
so she grew up very, very Republican.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So your inner skeptic said, "I can't take it no more." It took how many years to
Unpack it.
come out?
Well, I mean, the process of coming out was a gradual one for me. First, it was to my family, or really to my wife, and that was traumatic. That was difficult.
I'm sorry this is taking so long.
That's okay. We got the whole hour.
Did you keep this journey from her, or was she aware of and then you kind of disclose it, or was it like bombshell?
At the house church, did you say, now that my wife is out of the room, I got to tell you what I'm struggling with?
No.
Okay.
I just pulled out of leadership in the church when I got to the point where I realized I couldn't do it authentically anymore. And there's a lot of church environments where you can go through the motions for years and nobody would know the difference.
Right.
But in the kind of environment where we were in the house church, I mean, when your heart's not in it, it's like you're toast.
You're saying it's hard to be a fraud in the house church?
Very hard, yes.
See, that's why people don't want to go there.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
House church for me, thanks.
It's not going to work. So it was, you're either in it or you're not. And now, when I first tried to dip a toe into those waters, I found it was a very emotionally difficult topic for her. I was trying to feel out the waters, and at one point, I think it's fair to share this. I'd asked her. Just to feel things out, could you see yourself being with me if I weren't a Christian? And she's like, but that wasn't our deal, That's not who I married, and that was a good point. I mean, she sort of made a point that was very authentic.
Was it in your vows? Was it in your vows?
It was understood.
Because isn't that a little
yes.
bit like saying,
it sort of is.
Could you see yourself still being with me if I was 50 pounds overweight?
It's different. No, it's
yeah,
very different.
I agree. That is different.
Okay.
It's very different.
Okay, but it's something that's not in your
there's
vows.
an understood. Our wedding was a worship
Better
service.
or worse?
Our wedding was a worship service. Our wedding was not about us. It was about Christ in the church.
Okay.
I mean, it was as religious a ceremony as you could get, and when
Driven by both of you equally?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was. We were on the same page.
Okay.
And that's what made it difficult, was when I was no longer even in the same book.
You left the page and
I wasn't even in the book.
Yeah.
I was in a different
I had
library.
a counselor tell me years ago that the most important thing about two people when they get married is not who they are, but who they're becoming. Because obviously
And
the
you
point
don't
of
know what that is yet at 22.
Yeah. So when the point you guys were married, you're on the same page.
We were very much on the
and
same
then
page.
over time,
And we remained on the same page for many years. I think we had a very good marriage for a long time. We were married 16 years, and I would say 14 of them were very good.
That's how long my parents were married.
Really? Well,
that's how long I have been married.
yeah. It was very good. It was very good. But we did not have tools to work through this. And that was the problem, is that when it came time for us to work through our differences, there was no middle ground. There wasn't anything that I could find that would
Right.
say, here's how people on opposite ends of this spectrum can find common ground.
Right.
And because we couldn't find that, we failed to find a way to keep going forward on the same path.
Do you think that if you hadn't been living in the Deep South, there may have been more of a chance of
Are you
finding?
blaming this on the
No,
South?
but some of these resources are just, if you were in New York City, it may not have been as scarce a place to find that kind
Right.
of.
I think it has more to do with being a part of a very conservative background religiously, more so than a regional thing. Because now that I've gotten out and seen a lot more of the country, I realize that what I thought was kept in the South is actually everywhere. It's just that you have to go about 20 minutes out of a city, and then suddenly you're in the South again.
That's why I say everything below I-80 for me is the South.
Yeah. Well, and everything 20 minutes
I
out
read a
of
really
town.
good article about the influence of specifically the Southern Baptist Convention on the entire
On rural America, everywhere.
North America.
Right. Not even just in the
There
South.
are Southern Baptists in Minnesota.
Exactly.
It's
big Southern Baptist country. Yeah,
Obviously, you
absolutely.
can't use a compass.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I think it's not just a matter of a regional thing. Although I think that if I were living in a more metropolitan area, it might have been easier to find somebody in a middle ground. But that still wouldn't fix the problem that in our background, we didn't have a lot of respect for people who were not from our background.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's a certain set of values that you put at the top of your list, and any therapist who didn't have that as their list of priorities would not have been acceptable. So we just were stuck in a place where there wasn't a lot of flexibility to the faith that we were a part of.
I can't name names, but I actually know a couple in New York City who are both very well-known people in their fields. They're on TV all the time. One is a committed evangelical, and her husband is an atheist. And you go, and no one seems to think this is a problem in New York. Whereas, like you said, if this were happening in Atlanta or Jacksonville or something, it would cause a stir, and people wouldn't know what to do with this. But it's just not as cosmopolitan and diverse a place.
Some people
Well,
can
and
work through
also, if you're in New York, you probably know she's Jewish, she's Presbyterian. I mean, in Hollywood, the head of at that time, the head of the Henson Company. I met him because he was a VeggieTales fan, and he said, "My mother was Jewish, my father was Catholic. I married a Presbyterian. The only thing we can agree on for our kids is VeggieTales."
That's great.
Bringing the world together around
It's
vegetables.
the UN. It's the Coca-Cola.
We know
thing.
since the time that we split up, a resource has come out written by Dale McGowan called "In Faith and in Doubt." And it's a book specifically for that purpose. It's a book that's written to couples who are on different ends of the belief spectrum, not just in Christianity, but in multiple kinds of Christianity and even in some other faiths. Because that was something that he and his wife had dealt with. He was a secular humanist by upbringing, and his wife was a Southern Baptist. And but they came into their relationship already with that difference in place.
Right.
So it was something that was already understood, and it was something they worked through on the front end, and it never was a problem for them.
Right.
And he noticed that it was a problem for a lot of other couples.
How much worse do you think it is in your environment for one member of the marriage to say, "I'm now an atheist," versus one member saying, "I'm now a Democrat"?
Is there a difference?
Wow.
It's a joke where I'm from that there's like this lump that everybody gets thrown into, and Democrats and atheists are kind of thrown into that same, along with communists.
How would you label
criminals.
that lump?
What is that lump?
It's like
The other.
The others.
It's the other.
It's the other.
It's the them that
Right.
are ruining
It's the
America.
heathen, the
Well, whenever I
unrighteous.
hear somebody say, I hear a Christian say, "We have to take back America," my first thing I always think is, from whom?
From whom?
From the other Americans?
Right.
Does
From
that
the
even
America that's homogeneous.
make any sense?
Yeah.
But it's the sense of, and part of it I think is personality. I was thinking about this today because some people just are much less wired to be comfortable with change.
Yes.
I have a friend who's told me his ideal life would be to change countries every 2 years. That would be his ideal.
Like move to a different
Yes.
country, not change a country every 2 years, because that's pretty ambitious.
Move to a different country and start everything from scratch. And to me, that sounds like hell.
That's not.
That's
a
like
bit
a
much for me.
definition of, because I like routine and I'm not crazy about change. And I realize that makes me, like psychologically more likely to be a conservative and to say, "Oh, kids these days," and to turn into the cranky old.
Right.
Which you've demonstrated repeatedly on this podcast.
I've been told that I stray into get off my lawn territory, and I have to keep an eye on that because I have to say, now, is this generated from a well thought out belief, or is this generated from my discomfort with different?
And the best way to challenge that is to build relationships with people who are different from you.
Yes.
But that's uncomfortable, and he won't do that.
Do you know any atheists we could have on the show?
I'm sure I could find one or two.
Okay, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so
All right.
So what happened first? The marriage going or the job going?
The marriage. I mean, things sort of worked out their course in my personal life first. I was teaching at a different school, and I transferred to the school where my kids go to school, so that I could be around them more because it was.
Which is not a Christian school.
Yeah, public school, right?
It's public school.
Is there a difference?
Oh, come on.
We're in the north.
Technically, it's a public school.
Technically.
Okay.
In Mississippi, there is no difference.
Okay.
In fact, in public schools in Mississippi are more aggressively Christian than the private schools are.
Why?
I think it's that they feel that there's a calling there and an agenda that God has put them in this place to shine a light on this dark area, which happens to all be Southern Baptist. But the private schools have this greater diversity of people, religiously speaking. I don't know. It's hard to explain. I grew up at a small private school system that had Jews and had Hindus and had Christians, and they were very careful about how they did things. Like we were a part of the group that brought See You at the Pole to our area the first year that it went national.
Okay.
In fact, there's this great scene where we videoed when we did ours, and the principal wouldn't let us meet around the pole because we had an ACLU member's daughter in our.
This is the private school.
This is the private school,
Okay.
and they always made a big deal about anytime there was an open demonstration of faith, and they felt like the school was too complicit in making it, a group-wide thing, and doing it around the flagpole just seemed too demonstrative to them. So he said, "You're going to have to do it somewhere else."
So we put up any old poll.
So we just put up a poll.
You did, really?
We did. What we did was we got those
Rest of us for the rest of
Have
us.
poll.
we
we'll
put up
pray.
we put up our own poll, and the scene where we put it up was
Yeah,
so
so
dramatic. It was a
Iwo
great
Jima-like?
shot. Yes.
Yeah.
And so we got that, and the next year for the national promotional video, us putting that up was like the final shot, like freeze frame, cut, print.
You were a poster boy for
We
CU at the poll.
We were. Yeah. I mean, I helped bring it to Mississippi.
How
so
far you have fallen.
How far I've fallen.
Okay, but you were teaching.
So my point is that
Yeah.
that was a place that worked really hard to not be sectarian.
Yeah.
But was it an officially Christian private school?
No, but
Okay,
everybody
so it was-
there almost was Christians.
Well,
Just you had a
Except
small
for the
minority that
ACLU
wasn't.
kid.
Right. There was like one or
Yeah.
two. But then I go to the public school system, and it's just like overtly Christian. I mean, all of the teachers are very demonstrative about their religion. And so what happened was one of the children in my class.
What
went
grade
and-
is this?
These are seventh graders.
my
I was
daughter's
teaching
in
middle
seventh
school history, and they were stalking me on Facebook and saw that I had liked an atheist page. So they came to school the next day.
And did you do that not thinking anyone would notice? What
I
was it?
had
'Cause
not
that's
yet
like
figured.
a little public.
I had not yet figured out that
That's
it was
like one picture on your feed of you wearing a dress. Just
Right,
one
right.
little picture.
So what happened was I did not realize that you could hide your likes, and I would have at the time because I was very much in the closet as
Okay.
far as being an atheist is concerned.
What's the point of liking if you hide your likes?
Well,
I have
because
lots of likes I hide.
Why like?
it's a long story. Well, anyway, so she asked me in front of the class, "Are you an atheist?" And I refused to answer the question.
This is geometry?
Yeah, no, this was history at the time.
Oh, you're teaching history.
They moved me into math to get me out of history because they were afraid that I would lead the children astray. Well,
'Cause
that's
you would
my
present
interpretation.
An atheist view of history, which
I guess.
probably doesn't call America a Christian country
Right.
Well, he's probably a Democrat because he's an atheist.
at that point.
Well, it's
But
funny that you would say
turned into
that.
a Democrat immediately.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Okay, so first that problem happened, and the next thing that happened was the election happened in
Yeah.
2012,
Uh-oh.
and I taught my students how to follow the Electoral College. Well, if you know how to average state polls, which is what Nate Silver did, you can relatively closely predict who's going to win an election, especially if it's not real close. And in this particular year, it wasn't that close.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks before the election, we predicted 50 out of 50 states correctly by seventh graders.
That's good.
They did it themselves. We wrote the Electoral College number on the board and left it there for 2 weeks, and the day after, it was perfect.
Wow.
We got it completely correct.
Okay.
So my principal came into my classroom before
and he
class
was really
started.
impressed?
She said,
was really impressed?
She said, "You will not speak of this today." And I said, "This is the day after the election." I said, "My students have been following this for weeks, and they're excited." And she said, "You will not speak of it, and if anybody asks you about it, you will tell them you're not allowed to discuss it. And for the rest of the year, if anybody asks you about the election, you may not discuss it in your class." So what happened was these kids were going home
Because
after,
Romney lost.
Yes. Because these kids were going home and they were saying, "Mr. Carter says that Obama's going to win," which is not true. I was showing them how to track the polls.
Right. They thought you were
But they were going
advocating.
home and they were all
Right.
watching the same news channel, which
You're
was
letting
telling
seventh
them,
graders do your own PR.
apparently.
See, that may not be a good choice.
So their parents were watching certain news channels that said Romney was going to win in a landslide.
Right,
So that got
right.
back to the principal, and so
Mr.
then she began
Carter
to
says
limit
you're
me.
wrong.
So yeah, she probably thought I was a
Bill
Democrat.
O'Reilly.
Actually, I was
Okay.
the most objective teacher in that whole department because I was not giving my opinion about any of these things. But anyway,
Your math was clearly skewed Democrat.
apparently. So then they moved me out of my history class in the middle of the school year to a math class
For a
because
reason given?
I had said something about how the next year I wouldn't mind teaching math because I'd already had run-ins with this principal about,
Okay.
well, at the beginning of the year, we were talking about ancient history, and I talked about ancient human civilizations because it was world history, and that was part of our curriculum.
Yeah.
And they
You
said...
went back too far?
I went back too far. And hands started going up, and they said, "Mr. Carter, human civilizations can't go back 10,000 years because the Earth's only about 6,000 years old." And I said, "Where did you get that idea?" And they said, "Well, let me tell you." And the kid went home, and his dad was a principal at one of the other schools in the district, and they wrote out a whole genealogy with years out beside it and said, "Here you go." And I let him present it to the class.
Okay, can I ask an inflammatory question?
Go for it.
Uh-oh. Should I get my
Where
ukulele?
do Mississippi's public schools rank nationally?
Oh, man.
They're not at the top.
Did you just say that out loud?
I'm just curious.
Not at the top.
If Christian was here,
I have friends in Mississippi.
if Christian
Good
was
friends.
here.
I'm a teacher in
They're private
Mississippi, so
schools.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
There you go.
Do you have a
But at any
follow-up
rate,
question?
I'm just, it is interesting. I grew up here, so I'm not in Mississippi, obviously. And there were occasional moments where, in public school, political issues or religious issues, whatever, would kind of, come into but it was never a factor, really, in any of my classes. And I got to know various teachers and understood some were atheists, some were Christians, whatever. It was just kind of like, all right, we're all here, let's get along. It wasn't an issue.
You're in a suburb of Chicago.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that.
So it's just interesting hearing how public schools can be so dramatically different in a different environment.
Well, the standards actually called for me teaching the things I was teaching. I was following the standards.
Yeah.
But the parents were the problem. The parents disagreed.
Parents are always the
I
problem.
wonder how much that has changed over the last 50 years, because it feels like there is more a withdrawing or a reaction against the culture as the culture that we see on the news and on TV appears less and less what we remember about our shared Christian past.
We think we remember.
We think we remember. Yes, we falsely remember. Remember when we had slavery? Wasn't that Christian? The one that we think we remember.
Right.
And as we get further from that, and you can tell me if you disagree. In some areas, like if you live in Chicago, if you live in New York, if you live in in a major urban area, people that reflect that new diversity. If you live I grew up in Muscatine, Iowa.
Okay.
There were not many from the LGBT.
Right.
That you know of.
In my church, at least.
Okay.
At Mulford Evangelical Free Church, down by the Kent feed plant. Not many.
Probably.
So the notion of, wait a minute, they're marching and they're dressed crazy and they're acting really crazy sexy, is a very foreigner, other, it might as well be communists coming over. And it makes you very defensive, But then I moved to Chicago. I work in advertising. I find out some of my friends are gay, and they didn't look like the ones on TV. Suddenly, it's
It challenges your stereotypes.
Right.
Yes,
And that's been the strength of the entire LGBT movement over the last few decades.
Right.
Was familiarizing the
Right.
American public with appealing gay characters in movies, TVs, and then getting to know people like Ellen DeGeneres on TV, where it's like, well, this
the
is
happy
wonderful
homosexual
people.
next door. Now that we all know the happy homosexual next door, they're not as other.
Right.
And the next phase is for the happy atheist next.
Yes.
Yes, that's where I come in.
And that was actually one of my. But first, okay, wrap up your job.
Okay, so
'Cause then you
they
were
moved me to a
teaching-
math class. I
'Cause
think I did
math
well.
Is by nature atheistic, so
Right.
that's okay.
Well, the joke I always tell is the one that him at Meta gave, which is there's not that much room for atheism in math unless you get to imaginary numbers and you say this number's imaginary, just like God. There's really no other place that you can try to.
And you did that?
No, of course not. There's no chance for propaganda for atheism in math. So
Little, yeah.
no, none. Anyway, so I did math, and I'm still teaching math because I found
Are
that
all the math teachers atheists? Is that where they congregate them all in Mississippi?
there aren't a whole lot of atheist teachers in Mississippi.
Why? There's got to be a handful. Do they just stick them all in the math?
Some of them are
department?
biology.
Can you
teachers,
get
actually.
biology?
Can you get
That's
a
gotta be
teaching
tough.
degree if you're an atheist?
Sure.
Because
sure.
you got
We
yours
just-
when you were Christian, and then you switched.
Yeah, there's not actually a thing in the certification requirements that specifies that.
Even in
However,
Mississippi?
if you're a very open atheist in Jackson, Mississippi, it might be difficult to get a job.
Yeah. Have you found that to be the case?
Well, we'll find out in the next few months
What's going on?
because I'm not going to continue teaching at my current post. It didn't fit me very well. It's inner city, which I've done before. I did that in Atlanta. I worked for a relatively inner city-ish school system there too. But there were more resources, and in Jackson, Mississippi, all of the resources have fled the city, and it's just a very difficult situation. Okay. So it's not a good fit for me, and I'm looking for what's next.
Because you're more of a big budget geometry teacher. You want to do those big experiments.
Well, let's put it this way.
Geometrical experiments.
I had a
He wants
class.
computer graphic shapes, not the wooden blocks. that you
Right,
gotta
right.
deal with.
Word.
Well, I would like to have at least enough desks for all of my students. That would be a good place to start.
Wow.
I had 33
Boy,
students.
First world problem.
I
I
know.
know.
I had 33 students and I had 26 desks.
This is so like liberal entitlement right
That's
here.
a great opportunity to do math together.
right.
What's wrong with this? as kids?
Group work.
Can you figure out? Okay.
Yeah,
So, but you're still employed, and you hope that you can
Well,
continue to
I've
do
resigned from that job.
Oh.
It really was not working for me.
Did you pray about it?
No. The students had discovered the blog.
Guy just gave me a dirty look.
Did he?
Yeah.
The students.
Apparently, I went too far.
You know what though? It's funny you should say that because on my first day at the job, they actually led us all in a giant group prayer, like 3,000 of us. In fact,
The whole school?
the whole staff.
Was it sectarian?
I'm not sure that's legal.
Yeah, the man stood up and had us all recite this shepherd's psalm together. And he kept yelling for us to do it
Well, that's
louder
Jewish
and
Christian,
louder
at
and
least,
louder.
right?
It's
It's downright ecumenical.
You got a couple.
All right.
It's more than one.
Hey,
It was
you
technically
hit two birds with one
illegal.
shot. That's a pretty good
Might
prayer.
be Muslim too. They're people of the book.
I don't know that they do the shepherd's psalm, but okay. So at any rate, that didn't go over very well. So you could say that I have prayed at that job because we
Okay.
all had to were forced to.
Yeah.
I didn't really actually recite it, but
Oh, well, there you go.
instead I actually informed the American Humanist Association that my school system had an issue with sectarianism.
Ratted 'em out.
You're one of those.
I did, and so I
Oh.
contacted a friend at the HA, and they
Wolf in
sent a
sheep's
letter.
clothing.
Yeah, I'm worse actually. I'm a wolf in shepherd's clothing because
Jesus talks about that, John 10.
yeah, that's right. I'm one of those.
I'm going to throw the book at him.
That's right. So it hit the local papers that a teacher that was unnamed had ratted out on the school system for being this demonstrative during their
And a
mandatory
quick
meeting.
search of Facebook came up with the only teacher at that school who likes atheist
They
causes.
had a picture of the prayer. He's the only one who had his eyes open.
Right.
They knew who it was.
He was wearing a strainer on his head in rebellion.
Well, right. The community response was not positive. Let's just put it that way. It was not kind. No, for some reason, people have associated shootings at school with whether or not you can pray over the intercom.
I've heard that.
There seems to be a direct correlation in the minds of people.
We kicked God out of schools, and so now we have guns.
Right,
Even though everywhere else in the South, God and guns go side by side.
Right. No, where I live, people believe that if you cannot pray over the intercom, the direct result is you have school shootings. It's like there is no in between. Like those two things are directly correlated. It's fascinating to me. So one of the responses we got
I've not heard that.
on the local news was, well, I hope that the next time there's a school shooting, that whoever that teacher is out front taking the bullets first.
Seriously?
Yeah, that's what they said. That's the kind of, it's the internet. That's the kind of stuff we get on the internet. But anyway, that was the response there. I was glad I didn't put my name to that one, but now I'm like admitting it because I'm done at this point. Yeah.
Oops.
Well, now I've been on national television, so it's pretty much out there.
Be nice to him, the South.
Right.
I went to public school my entire life. So what is that? Plus kindergarten, that's 13 years.
Yeah.
Plus I went to public college.
Yeah.
There was never a prayer over an intercom, and I don't think anyone was ever shot at one of my schools.
I remember, like, Iowa, kindergarten, first grade, the day starting with a hymn played over the intercom.
With lyrics, not just the music.
I think so, yeah. There was a weird...
See, that must have protected you then through your whole public school career. You were just kind of covered from bullets.
No shootings.
Right.
Zero hunting accidents, yes. Okay, so you may or may not have a job.
Right.
But you've gotten more... You've taken up a cause.
I have.
You've gotten sick, which is why you're up here.
The fact
traveling around.
the fact that it bothers people as badly as it does, that I'm not a believer, is why I've decided to let everybody know that I'm not, and talk about this and normalize it because they're judging me unfairly. You know, they're making judgment calls and character evaluations that aren't fair because in their
Isn't that
minds,
just human nature?
So the assumption
It
is...
is.
Don't you do that when you see terrorists on
I
the
try to
news
fight
and-
it.
Okay.
I try to fight it because I think it's biased.
So the assumption being that if someone does not believe in God, they
They can't be moral.
They can't be moral. They have to be a horrible person and...
Which is patently false if you open your eyes, but that's a prejudice that
But
people have.
the other opposite is
but-
also bad. You can't assume because somebody claims to believe in God that they're somehow an upstanding, righteous person when we know there's horrible things done all the time. by
Right. But
such
if
people.
all of you atheists stay in the closet, then we never get to know you.
Correct.
And then we just go on thinking that you're probably evil.
Right.
So he's
and
like
it's
the
your own
Rock
fault.
Hudson of the atheist
And
movement.
you can learn about
Right?
atheists through watching God's Not Dead.
I was thinking Caitlyn Jenner. Oh, God's not dead. Let's not.
I had a whole
Don't-
post on that one. So
Don't go there.
yeah.
I didn't see it, but I know people who worked on it and stuff.
We can't touch that. That's
You know,
untouchable.
Funny you should say that about the coming out part.
Yeah.
There was the Openly Secular campaign does these videos,
Yeah.
And I did my little video. It's just a couple minutes long.
How would someone find it if they wanted to look
They
for
go
it?
to the openlysecular.org.
Openlysecular.org.
Mm-hmm.
It's also on YouTube. If
It
you
is.
type in Neil Carter Openly Secular,
that works.
May get to it faster.
Yeah, some other folks have done videos as well. The most interesting one lately is that the president of Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary did one.
Wait a minute.
Let me repeat that.
Wait a minute. Say that
the
again.
The president,
Yeah.
Danny Aiken, of Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in, Wake Forest, North Carolina. He did an openly secular video, and it released last week. Let me tell you what he did. He said, he's not saying he's openly secular. What he's saying is, as a good Baptist, because Baptists believe in separation of church and state.
They
At least
originated
that's
the
what I
idea
was.
in Rhode
That's what I
Island,
was
yeah.
taught. He said, we support.
That was before.
That was before. That was before they
Obama.
got to be in power. Right. Right.
They can change their mind.
Right. Well, they clearly did. And Aiken came out and said, look, this is actually a historical perspective here.
Right.
We believe that people should be free to express differences of opinion because, the only way that you're going to be free to express your opinion is if everybody is free to express theirs. It cuts both ways. And yeah, Baptists, of anybody, should know historically the importance of a pluralistic public square so that there's room for everybody. Right.
Yeah.
But that was when they were in the minority.
Baptists engaged. Baptists engaged.
Right. Well, they came in as a minority. They came in as the persecuted group.
Right.
And so they were champions of religious liberty in the early days.
Right.
One of the
It's changed.
best
Power
books.
has a way of distorting.
Changing your feelings about that.
One of the best books I probably read in the last 5 years was a historical biography of Roger Williams, the Puritan who basically founded Rhode Island, who was the foundation for religious freedom, not just in the United States, but even throughout the Western world.
Ian Hutchinson's in there somewhere as
Right,
well.
yeah, the same time period, all that. But what a fascinating story, and it was his actual profound and sincere commitment to faith in God that led him to a pluralistic view
Yes.
of giving people the freedom of belief rather than compelling them, because his idea, which was then later picked up by the founders like James Madison and others who wrote the First Amendment,
Jefferson.
was in order for people to have a genuine love of God, they have to be free.
It can't be forced.
Exactly. It can't be
coerced by the
or
state.
forced, which means you also
Right.
open the door up for people to not believe in God
Correct.
and be given that liberty and freedom without persecution.
But
so
still-
real faith requires there to be atheists.
But
That's what
still,
I'm saying.
that they would have jobs. Do you have to let them have jobs?
Well, I think under our Constitution, yes.
Technically, yes.
Yes.
I know. But, that's what secular means. Secular does not necessarily mean that you don't believe in God. Secular simply
Right.
means you believe that the public square doesn't need to privilege one sectarian faith over another. Because, one of the things that I wrote on my blog is how there were riots in Philadelphia in the 1800s over which Bible would be read at the beginning of the school day, a Catholic
beautiful?
Bible or the Protestant Bible. Riots. People were killing each other over this. And that's in a country that was founded on pluralism. So apparently it's something that creeps up from time to time, no matter what.
it's tribalism.
Yes.
And I think tribalism, it's so important to differentiate being proud of your beliefs or feeling like you've picked the right belief versus self-identifying as, now this is my tribe and I need to defend my tribe.
Right.
And that's when things, but that's human nature.
It is,
Whether
and
it's-
atheists do it too.
Right. Well, and I appreciate you
I know,
saying that
I
because
know.
I think sometimes the attitude has been, well, religion historically is in all these bad things. If we just get rid of religion, as John Lennon famously sang in his Imagine song, then everything would be just fine. And the reality is, people are people.
That's overly simplistic.
Yeah.
There's a
People
strong
are people, so why should it be? Okay.
there's a strong contingent within the secularist movement and atheist movement, and there is such a thing that
They just don't know what they're moving toward.
they're not, well, so many of them do. I would call myself a humanist before I would call myself an atheist. But there's a lot of talk.
Humanism has a lot more content.
There's right. Well, atheism doesn't really tell me what you believe.
Right. It tells you what you don't believe.
Right.
It's a plank. It's not a platform.
Exactly. That's good. You should use that.
And stick it in your eye.
But there is a contingent that's asking those questions. What is it that
Right.
we're moving toward? Like you
Right.
said, what is it? Not just what are we coming out of? And once you start asking those questions about what we're moving toward, you start to recognize that the challenges you face and the hurdles you have to get over are the same hurdles that different religious faiths
Right.
are also trying to get over. So we're actually seeing some of the same problems in human nature. We just have slightly different solutions for it.
I remember years ago I was on a panel at Northwestern University, and all these different religious traditions represented, a rabbi and a imam, and there was a humanist chaplain. And one of the questions from the audience to us was, well, what is the mission that your particular faith tradition is compelled to? So different people were answering. And it was fascinating to hear the humanist chaplain because his answer was all about environmentalism and kind of the green movement and
it's one of the planks.
global warming. So, but it just shows you again, even when you take God out of the equation, there's still this human need for a sense of purpose and intentionality, and what are we working toward, and what are we trying to overcome. And every religious tradition or worldview has that in some way.
Right.
We all have our boogeyman's.
Right.
We all have our things that we're worried are going to happen and that we're fighting against. Boogeymen.
Boogie person.
Man's plural.
I think
it's my dog. Okay, I was reading one of your blog posts. This is the last thing we'll talk about because we're running out of time. Okay.
We have the same drink, and we didn't even buy them.
And you were talking about the difference between the nuns and the duns. I thought that was fun.
I'm reading a book on that right now.
You are?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
We gotta have that guy.
Okay, we'll talk about it soon, but not right now.
The duns. I like the duns.
Yeah.
Stop talking.
Sorry.
We don't have much time.
Well, I felt the need to distinguish between people who are simply unaffiliated versus people who more deliberately have left their religion.
Enough.
The majority
tried it. Yeah. Don't like it.
The majority of people who are not affiliated officially with any one religious group are still theists, for a lack of a better way to put it. The percentage of Americans who identify as atheist or agnostic is still very small. It's in the single digits. So,
do you think that's accurate, or is it just people? It's a halo effect where people don't want to come out of the closet?
It's underreported. Is it going to explode?
It is underreported. There's a branding problem. My friend Todd Stiefel said it really well in his video. He said, people come up to him all the time and say, I really don't believe in God either, but I'm not an atheist.
Okay.
Right.
What do you mean by belief?
Well,
is it
Right. Well, and we could get into quibbling over definitions.
Club.
Right.
I don't want to be in your
club.
It's a branding problem
because it seems to be an angry club.
Right. And we're working on changing that.
Because I saw Richard Dawkins on late night TV, and he seemed, frankly,
angry,
a little arrogant.
Well, the same exists on the other side.
As
there's
opposed
people who
to
say,
the Christians that I see
believe
on
in
late night
Jesus,
TV.
but I really don't want to be a Christian.
Westboro Baptist Church.
Well, as Gandhi said, I love your Christ, I don't like your Christians. It's There you go.
Well, there's lots of nice atheists out there.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Then you've met them.
I'm making large numbers of friends of them. Yes.
Okay. So you were writing about the duns, and this is how you close that piece. Maybe all of us are a little bit done in the sense that we are living in a post-Christian culture. Stuff that impacted people 50 years ago just doesn't resonate like it used to. So maybe you, being Christians, need to seriously rethink how you contextualize your quote-unquote good news. We are all a little bit done in a way. You should probably rethink what you're doing instead of repeating the exact same canned speeches and gimmicks you learned back when women wore shoulder pads and mullets weren't yet uncool.
Wow. I like that one.
Hating on the 80s. Yeah. Those were the days.
So that's fun because you talk about the notion that you say if you feel that everything you're doing is dictated by God and is unchangeable, then you're unable or at least unwilling to learn anything new. Mm-hmm. And I do.
It's the closed-mindedness of.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the notion that God has asked me to do this, and if this is of God,
how do you challenge that?
It doesn't matter how poorly I do it.
And the results don't matter. And the results don't even matter. I was speaking with a man who has sort of a self-styled apologist. I don't even want to give his name because, frankly, I don't like him that much. But
that's okay.
He said, I said, do you understand that your method is not actually winning any converts? I've watched you, and nobody's actually changing their minds. And he says, that's not my responsibility. That's God's responsibility. Well, that's a very closed-minded way of approaching it. I understand the mentality behind that.
A friend of mine is a Christian documentary filmmaker from a more charismatic strain, but very much, let's go out on the street, let's love people, let's pray for people, let's try to heal people, and let's videotape what happens.
Right.
And they were
so it's a show.
They were trying to do that. They were trying to do that on the beach, actually on Venice Beach once. And there were 3 guys with "God hates fags" signs and bullhorns standing there. And they finally went over to them and say, we're trying to love people. Why are you doing it this way? And he said, well, because God wants us to tell the truth, and speak the truth. We need to end these people are in sin and they're going to go to hell. And my friend asked him just directly, okay, how many people have you seen this turn around?
Good question.
And he said, a couple. And he said, how long have you been doing this here?
Years, probably.
He said 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah, you might want to try some other options. I'm not an expert.
Let's just back up, put the car in reverse,
yes,
and consider a different path.
I think some of the people I've talked to, they fear the other extreme, which is, well, we need to adapt our methods and our message so much so we can win all kinds. And you see, 20,000 people showing up at a church.
Which is also the megachurch thing.
Well, it depends. But then some people accuse, well, you've lost the message. You've watered
Right.
it down. You know.
Right.
So there's these fears on both ends, and
Right.
yet they both err too far. One on the side of practicality, the other side of tenacity to orthodoxy, or at least what they perceive to be orthodoxy.
See, when I make teaching stuff, what's in the Bible or VeggieTales or whatever.
You've gone from vegetables to puppets. I mean, that's...
See, I'm adaptive. I'm adaptive. But I tend to look at it as like, will this make sense to my kids? 10-year-olds, well, they're not anymore, but when they were, today, will this make any sense? Because my grandmother wrote a Christian children's book.
Really?
Yes, that has been printed millions of times and is in hundreds of languages around the world. It is the scariest piece of writing. My mom will not associate
It was a
with
different time.
It was a completely different time, and it's just scary. Yeah. It's just scary. It was about all the sin in your hearts and how it's going to just destroy you from the inside out, kids. So, it's nasty.
Well, anytime you
my
bring
grandmother.
your message to a new area, like if it's a missionary venture,
Yeah.
one of the first things they do is they talk about contextualization.
Yeah.
Your part of your responsibility is to learn the culture that you're addressing,
Right.
to get to know what its values are, how it thinks.
Which is why you're much more likely to be well received if you speak at a church in Jackson, Mississippi.
Because I speak Baptist.
Than
Right.
Richard Dawkins.
Yes.
Right.
I look just like them and I talk just like them.
If the whole...
If you turn up the drawl.
If the school...
That's what I mean by a wolf in shepherd's
If the
clothing.
school thing doesn't work out, you could probably make a ton of money consulting churches.
Yeah, I don't think they're interested in what I have to say.
I think they are. That's the irony.
You're talking to the
I
wrong
think they
churches.
really
I
are.
don't think they are.
Wrong churches.
Did I have time for one more point?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
yes, you
so
can, yes.
when the study came out about the nuns, the rise of the nuns, most
Yeah.
recently the Pew Research,
Right.
The main reaction from the evangelical circles that I used to run in is to pretty much dismiss it. Because in the sense of, are we doing anything wrong? The answer is no, because the numbers that are dropping are in all those other
Right.
people. The evangelical response has
They're
been,
holding on.
the drop is in mainline churches and in Catholic churches, whereas evangelical churches are basically staying steady, depending on how you look at the numbers. And so they're not really asking any hard questions about whether anything needs to change because
Right.
they feel like they've just won that particular battle. It's everybody else. And the standard narrative for that one is, if anybody has left the faith, the problem must be with them. It must be that they just weren't committed enough. But if it's somebody like me, the answer was not that I wasn't committed enough. The answer is I was passionately pursuing what I was doing, and it just led me in a different direction. But they don't seem to allow for that possibility.
So what can, my last question for you, what could Christians do to make you feel more comfortable where you live and in the culture that you're in?
How could they be a better neighbor?
Working to dismantle some of the stereotypes by just sitting down and having conversations like this.
That
and
you
like
don't attract school shootings everywhere you
Yeah,
go?
that would be nice if they could start with that. Just coming to understand that I'm a regular person with all the same kind of characteristics that they have.
Are you?
He
I
sprouts
am,
horns on the
truly,
weekend, though.
except for that.
Wait,
There's
what did
the
you
slaughtering
go
the
as
kittens.
last Halloween?
I don't even remember.
So you're admitting you celebrated Halloween?
Yeah, I mean,
Answered that question.
I just want to verify it wasn't anything with horns.
my girls dress up like
Just tell-
princesses, and
Yeah.
Homestuck is apparently a thing they're into now. If
What?
you've ever Homestuck, it's a
don't know what
subculture.
that is.
Don't even.
Homestuck.
Homestuck.
It's don't.
Is that related to home church?
No,
Oh,
it's a webcomic.
it is? Okay.
It is.
What help us out? What else? What can we do for you?
Yeah, just
What can we? There's roughly 10,000 relatively thoughtful, except for 7 of them, Christians out there.
Listening. to
start
this
by
podcast.
reading Godless and Dixie, and no,
Oh,
seriously,
your blog
and interacting
at Patheos.
Yes,
Okay.
and interacting because I'm not just writing, and people like me are not just writing to tell everybody what we think. We're writing to start a conversation and to keep
Okay.
one going because I don't think I've got the world figured out either. And I'm benefiting from these conversations. I'm benefiting from thinking through because I don't think I have the solutions for the world either. I think we're all trying to figure these things out ourselves.
Are we all in this boat together?
We are. And so that's something we have in common. We may not agree on what happens after we die, but we know that we're here together before then.
But isn't global warming because of gay marriage?
Right. And
See,
apparently,
and this is where we have a hard time
Right.
coming up with solutions.
so finding common ground would be nice. And if we could both agree to try to do that, that would make a huge difference in terms of relationship building.
Okay. Do you know my piece of advice for more antagonistic atheists?
Okay.
You're not helping. Because when people feel attacked, they get defensive.
They do.
And that happens on both sides.
They do.
So particularly, and this really isn't helping, and I've talked to Peter Boghossian about this, when atheist scientists correlate science with rejection of God,
Mm-hmm.
it creates a false dichotomy that you either have to reject science or reject God. And for most people in America, they feel more attached to God than to science.
Right. So now you're actually hurting.
So science
right.
loses out, so you're hurting science.
Well, both sides are feeding that problem, unfortunately.
I know.
Not on this podcast.
No.
But not on this
We don't
podcast.
feed anyone on this
Heck,
podcast.
no.
Right.
Okay. We're not terribly popular with our young Earth creationist brethren, though we love them dearly. And we think they love us. Maybe. Oh, Neil, how does it feel to be on a podcast with a bunch of Christians? I hope we made you feel at home and that we didn't make you roam all around an industrial park to find our building. Now that you're here, thanks for being willing to tell your story to me and Sky, because now that we know you, you're a great moral guy. Though we still wonder what you went trick-or-treating as last Halloween. Thanks for coming, Neil.
My pleasure.
It was really nice to have you. And if you ever get up here again,
Okay.
we'll have you on again.
Love to.
Okay. Thanks for coming. See you next week.
See you guys.